Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 3548.
Does the gentleman seek to call up the bill as amended?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 339, H.R. 3548, a bill to amend Title 12 of the Public Health Service Act to expand the definition of trauma to include thermal, electrical, chemical, radioactive, and other extrinsic agents.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Pitts, and the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, each will control 20 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous materials into the record on the bill.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 3548, the Improving Trauma Care Act of 2014, introduced by Congressman Bill Johnson of Ohio. This bill amends the Public Health Service Act by expanding the current definition of trauma to include an injury resulting from exposure to thermal, electrical, chemical, radioactive, and other agents. I urge my colleagues to support this important legislation and reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I can consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
I rise in support of H.R. 3548, the Improving Trauma Care Act of 2014. This legislation amends the definition of the term trauma for the purpose of trauma care grants authorized in Title 12 of the Public Health Service Act to include burns and other injuries resulting from electrical, chemical, or other exposures. Strengthening our nation's trauma care services is an important priority that I would hope to continue to work with members on both sides of the aisle to address. I want to thank Congressman Johnson for his sponsorship of this legislation, and I also want to acknowledge the work of our committee, Chairman Upton, Chairman Pitts, Ranking Member Waxman, Ranking Member Pallone, and all the staff in bringing the bill to the floor today, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Texas reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Johnson.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise in strong support of H.R. 3548, the Improving Trauma Care Act of 2014. Bipartisan legislation I am proud to have sponsored with the support and counsel of the Energy and Commerce Committee. I commend the committee staff for their hard work to move this legislation forward through markup of all subcommittee and full committee levels and steer it to the House floor today. This simple but important bill seeks to refine inconsistent definitions of what constitutes trauma as outlined in the United States Code. Common sense would certainly point to many burn injuries as a type of trauma, but the U.S. Code doesn't recognize them as such. Failure to incorporate the full range of traumatic injuries in the description of trauma, including burns, can result in gaps in coverage and provisions of care throughout the care system. By modernizing this term as federally defined, Congress can ensure that it accurately reflects the medical realities of trauma and protects access to the provision of trauma care. There are important gains to be made in the field of traumatic medicine by further integration of care and finding synergies between burn and trauma centers. This has been all too evident in efforts to save lives after national tragedies such as 9/11 and the Boston Marathon bombing. The importance of strengthening our nation's burn care infrastructure can't be stressed enough. Inadequacy and inconsistency in the U.S. Code around the classification of burns further compound serious shortfalls in our nation's traumatic emergency medical care system. Traumatic injury is the leading cause of death for those under age 44, but getting a victim of trauma to a level 1 or 2 trauma center within the first golden hour can make all the difference. However, 45 million Americans do not have access to a level 1 or 2 trauma center within an hour's travel. I applaud the efforts of my colleague, Dr. Burgess, to reauthorize trauma programs and improve this system with his bill, H.R. 4080, which I am also proud to support. I thank him for his endorsement of H.R. 3548 and am grateful for his support to improve trauma care more broadly. In addition, this legislation has the strong support of a broad coalition of the major medical societies and associations representing the trauma care community, including the American Burn Association, American College of Surgeons, American Association for the Surgery of Trauma, American Trauma Society, American College of Emergency Physicians, Trauma Center Association of America, and America's Essential Hospitals. I want to thank Chairman Upton and Chairman Pitts for their hard work in promoting the Improving Trauma Care Act of 2014. I hope my colleagues will support this common sense legislation that prevents gaps in coverage and improves the provision of trauma care, and I strongly encourage a yes vote. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, we have no other speakers, and I'll just close by urging my colleagues to join me in supporting H.R. 3548, and I yield back to the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Texas yields back. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
And Mr. Speaker, I also urge members to support this common sense legislation, bipartisanly supported, and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 3548 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.